And so as I look forward to hearing Leah's story, she's a great educator, been involved in all kinds of things, and I think one of the things both her and Cecily are very proud of as a mother, grandmother. She was also a homeschooler, entrepreneur, and a regional leader in the patriotic movement. She lived outside the U.S. for many years, and some of that time was in Chile, which she's going to talk to us a little bit about what she saw and some of the things with the Communist Revolution. So I look forward to hearing that, and again, just a wonderful storyteller, and thank you for coming today to tell us this.
Well, with the theme, Why We Love America, I can't speak for all of you, but I can speak for myself. I know this is an unusual group, but how many of you have lived for an extended period of time outside of the United States? Quite a few of you. It was something that I imposed upon my kids in their training, that you really don't even know who you are as an American unless you leave and you look at it from the outside looking in. And you have something to compare it to. Sadly, for most Americans, they don't have anything to compare it to. They only know what they've experienced. I had the great fortune of living in the Netherlands for 10 years. I was an exchange student in high school and then decided to stay for another 9 years and married a Dutchman and learned an awful lot about myself. And I had the goal to become more Dutch than any other Dutch person. I was going to speak Dutch so well nobody could tell that I wasn't Dutch. And I did achieve that. Towards the end there, only very linguistically trained people would say, there's something about the way you speak. But that's as far as they could get. So I had them fooled. I was more Dutch than the Dutch. But after these 10 years of being there were certain things that were just eating at me. And I had decided either get over that and become one of them, or it's time to get out. And really what was bugging me that I just couldn't get out of my system was my natural entrepreneurness, my dreaminess, my wanting to make things better. And the Dutch have, I would call, very much an inferiority complex. It's because they're a small country. I really have determined that small countries have small-minded thinking, and they could not encourage me to fulfill any of my dreams. Their comments would be, who do you think you are? One of their longtime sayings was, if you're born a nickel, you'll never become a dime. That just hurt me. That just wasn't me. I just couldn't and wouldn't believe that. And so after discovering this is what old world is. Old world thinking is tired and burnt out. All the ambition is gone. They've suffered so many wars that they just don't have dreams anymore. They've just accepted defeat, and things are the way they are, and they're never going to change. Well, I just couldn't get that out of my system, and I just kept thinking, Leah, either accept it and become more like them, or it's time to get out. Well, thankfully, I did have a husband who also wanted to get out, and we came back to the United States in 1989. And we birthed our babies here and raised them here. And by the way, for those of you who've known me for a little while, I lived for a long time in Coeur d'Alene. I know many of you from almost 20 years ago, can you believe it? During the Ron Paul campaign, Coeur d'Alene and Spokane did a lot of working together, and that's how I know a lot of you. But some of you don't know, I did come back here in 2019. And from here, moved around a bit, Colorado, South Dakota, and I am finally back and have made Coeur d'Alene my home again. So I'm happy to be back here. But I never got that international adventuresomeness out of my system. And so as my kids were growing up, I told them you need to have an international experience. Everybody should have an international experience. In that way, you finally find who you are. And you have something to compare it to, and everything that you do becomes conscious of why you do things. You don't just do it because everybody does it that way. So in 2012, I had been working on my kids for years on getting them to do something like this. The agreement was, I would decide where if they decided when. And in 2012, they came to me and said, Mom, we're ready. let's do this international experience. Well, it wasn't exactly great timing in my life. In 2012, I was recently divorced and $80,000 in debt, and this is when my kids think that this is a great idea to do this international experience. So I knew this was my one-shot chance. They were 18 and 20. If we didn't do it then, it just wasn't going to happen. So we boldly sold everything we owned, scraped together every dime I had, a whole $11,000 to go to a country where we had never been. We didn't speak the language, we didn't know anybody, and we had no clue how we were going to support ourselves on $11,000. So I called it their homeschool final exam. And a heck of a field trip of a lifetime, for sure. So this field trip and homeschool final exam lasted 7 years. And my choice was to go to Chile. And the reason why I chose Chile was I had studied for about 5 years. I had followed the Economic Freedom Index that I think there were a couple of different organizations that put that out. But consistently for 5 years, Chile was moving up in economic freedom to the point that it was 7th most economically free nation in the world, as the U.S. had been dropping down to 14th position. There were quite a few things about Chile that I didn't like, but it was a great experience. And one of the things I didn't like about them was their culture. There was an extreme culture of envy and distrust of others. And I would say this absolutely led them into being ripe for revolution. What kind of revolution, you say? Like the American Revolution? No, not quite. It took me a little while to figure out what this revolution was all about. It was a very violent revolution, and very, very sudden, overnight. It was definitely one that was against all authority, all government. We wanted to protest just about everything that was out there. I'm going to skip through just a whole bunch of these, but I just want you to see what revolution looks like, and utter destruction. This was in the city of Santiago where I lived, a city of 7 to 8 million people. I had never experienced that before. That was quite the experience. And overnight turned into revolution. Revolution meant destruction of all kinds of things. Tens of thousands of small businesses were destroyed, looted, rioted. Over 200 churches were burnt to the ground. This was one of the churches. More destruction of the churches. Note some of the flags and signs that are here, because you might have seen that here in the U.S. It wasn't enough to destroy their subway system. Then they destroyed the bus system. Then they tore down all of the traffic lights. They made it utterly impossible to get around. And I was living in the middle of this. I'm trying to understand, how could a country that was the 7th most economically free nation in the world, that I knew had gone from 70% poverty to a mere 7% poverty, that I knew in the 1970s had successfully, one of the few countries in the world, successfully kicked the communists out of their country during the 1970s. A country that was prospering, that was known as the economic miracle of the world, suddenly breaks out into violent revolution. So the curious person that I am, you may call that insane, went out amongst the crowds like this and started interviewing people and saying, why are you doing this? One of the big complaints that they had was, we need a new constitution. And I said, okay, what specifically is in your constitution that's causing all of the problems that you're out here fighting against? No one could answer me. And then I would say, you haven't read your Constitution, have you? And they had not. I knew their Constitution was written during the dictatorship of Pinochet. It was copied mostly after the United States Constitution. And after Pinochet stepped out and they considered themselves free from their dictatorship, which I say prevented them from becoming Cuba, it had been amended hundreds of times until in just 2005 it had been accepted by the country, by a socialist president, by a socialist Congress as A-OK in just 2005. And here we are in 2019, this prosperous nation is violently protesting this Constitution. So I'm still trying to understand, what is this? First of all, while I was still living there, they did not recognize, most people did not recognize that this was communist revolution. It was after I left. And the reason why I left was because they were going to have a people's referendum. Let's let the people choose. Should we have a new constitution or not? Should we have a constitutional convention? Well, after interviewing many, many people, I came to the conclusion that 80% of these people want a new constitution, irrelevant of the fact that they hadn't read it and they couldn't identify anything wrong with it. Does this sound a little bit familiar here? In knowing that they were going to go forth with a constitutional convention, I said, I'm out of here. This is how countries are lost. If you want to lose a country, start tinkering with its constitution. Have we heard calls for a constitutional convention here in this country? Something that we absolutely must prevent from happening. It would be the death of this nation. The problem does not lie in our Constitution. The problem lies in us. It wasn't until a specific moment in time that I realized what was happening. And that was one day the battle, well, a couple of days, the battle was happening in my neighborhood. When I say the battle, there were these masses of protesters out there like this, battling in the street and fighting with the police and destroying things everywhere they went. And this was my neighborhood, and I turned into a mama bear and was chasing them out of my neighborhood. And I was thoroughly distressed this day because they were about ready to set on fire and destroy the tallest building in Latin America, 72 stories high. And it would have been the perfect example of the destruction of capitalism if they could have lit this building on fire. I didn't care so much about a building, but I did care because I'm a mama bear and my grocery store was in the basement of that building. So I turned into the mama bear and was just chasing them like crazy. Get out of here, go away, stop the violence. I was a lunatic. I knew they were all thinking this gringa loca was what they were thinking. But I still was dying to find out. I don't understand why in a country that I chose that was prospering so well, why are you fighting against everything that this country exists over? And so as the battle was preparing, the people from all over the city were coming to my neighborhood to battle against the police. The police were on one side of the street and the protesters were on my side of the street in my neighborhood. They were still assembling, but they were preparing for battle. And I lost my mind and went in between. I thought the police have got my back, certainly, right? They're not going to let this crowd attack me. I had maybe stupidly faith, I don't know, but I went out in front of them and found the loudest agitator. He was stirring up the crowd, preparing for battle, and I got in his face and I said, "Why are you destroying your own country? Why?" He says, "Lady, you don't get it." I said, "Clearly I don't." He said, "We've got to burn it down before we can rebuild it." Have we heard the term build back better?
Latin freedom first.
It was at this moment, and by then there were about 40 people encircling me, all the protesters yelling and cursing at me. I'm still praying that the police have got my back, that I decided this was the face of communism. I didn't realize it until then. I had worked for the Birch Society for many years. I'd been well trained by the Birch Society. I thought I knew what communism was. I didn't know what communism was until that moment. I did wisely decide to back out of that group and get myself out of that situation, but I was in horror to discover that that is what this was all about. So my question to you is, how is it possible that a peaceful and prosperous nation who only 50 years before successfully kicked out communism was bringing it back in again? How does this happen? I would like to think that much of this happened when Pinochet stepped out again in the early 1990s. They allowed back tens of thousands of families that they had kicked out that were the communists. And many of them went to work in the universities. And they'd spent decades training up the youth of Chile and turning them against everything good that had happened and saying that they had become a colonial capitalist country, and that was what was wrong with Chile. So again, they didn't have anything compared to, they only knew their own country. What they didn't and weren't willing to look at is themselves, and to see that it was perhaps they themselves and their loss of morality and truth that had corrupted them. And I ask you, is this something that could still happen here? If it could happen in Chile over, and I didn't say this all started over the price, 4-cent increase in the price of the public transportation system. I asked my very many Venezuelan friends that were living in Chile, do you understand what's happening here? And they said, absolutely. It started in Venezuela over the price of the public transportation system. They said, but Leah, we were the protesters. We were the ones out there in the streets demanding changes to our Constitution. It was too difficult to amend our Constitution. We wanted it easier to change our Constitution. They said we lost our country ourselves. We did it to ourselves. And I said, what are you going to do about this now that you've reinvested your life in a new country, built businesses, have mortgages on homes, raising your family here, and now the same thing is happening to this country that you've chosen to live in? And they said, we're trying to warn them. I said, what do they say? They said, the same thing that we told the Cubans when the Cubans came to Venezuela to warn us. They said, this is a trap. Don't fall for it. And we in Venezuela said, we're not stupid. We're not Cubans. That would never happen here. And they let it happen. Now, the Chileans were telling the Venezuelans exactly the same thing. And then I came back to the United States in December of 2019, and a few short months later, it began in Seattle. And of all the slides that I have, you'll see the same flags, the same names, the same acronyms used. And it was then, not until I got back, that I realized there is a playbook for how to cause a communist revolution. And all it takes is a spark. Freedom is fragile. America is fragile. We've been undermined for so many decades, as the Birch Society has done a phenomenal job of teaching us and showing us the evidence of how we've been undermined. And yes, we've been resisting this for a long time. But it's been well over 100 years. It's probably been since the beginning of our country, but certainly over the last 100 years. We are fragile. Do we know, the question is, do we know what we're fighting for? Do we know what those principles were of our founding fathers? Do we know what the principles of our Constitution? Do we know how to keep freedom? And then, very important, that very few else are doing other than the Birch Society has been consistently for over 60 years, is identifying the enemy. You must know what you're fighting for to preserve it, but even more, you need to know what you're fighting against. Who is the enemy? Is it China? Is it Russia? I'd like to say, well, yes, but it's already within. It's been within for a very long time. Our universities have destroyed, again, at least a generation or two of our population who now believe that socialism and communism are good. We have a lot to do, a lot of work to do to restore what's been lost. And it's going to take all of us getting involved in this. No more thinking Trump is going to take care of this. We're out of our minds if we think that one person can take care of this. This has been 100 years of destruction of America. We've got to understand that what the timeless truths are of Americanism. What made us the greatest nation on the earth? What made us the nation that people from all over the world wanted to come here and be a part of this? Most Americans don't recognize this because this is all they've ever known. They've never seen what we've seen. We have to understand the principles of minimal governance, of self-governance, of personal responsibility, and most importantly, of a moral and religious people. Without these, we cannot have freedom. I would like to urge you to learn more about the John Birch Society. I am currently field coordinator, moving on soon to a different position. We have someone else here today who's taken on a grand new position within the Birch Society, and that is Mr. William Jasper is now the president of the John Birch Society. There are many of us here today that have been longtime members. We have Steve over here that does have a table set up, and had I known that our coordinator was not going to come, I would have brought all the materials for you to look at, but we have so much that you can learn from. The bare minimum that I ask all of you is please get a subscription at least to the New American Magazine, but it's part of becoming a Birch Society member. So please do come and talk to us afterwards. This organization has been around for so very, very long, exposing those enemies of freedom and teaching the right principles of Americanism and of our Constitution. Join us in restoring America and defending and protecting it from every enemy against it, primarily communism and globalism. Thank you very much for letting me share today.
What did I say? Thank you, Leah. I appreciate the story and the storytelling. And again, we're going to take a few minutes for questions. But as we do that, why doesn't everybody take us? We'll take our 7th inning stretch if you want to stretch. I remind you again what we started this with. The Constitution. Do you have it? Have you read it? Do you share it? Do you understand it? Federalist Papers, where they talked about what it meant, not just what they were writing, but what did it mean and why were they writing it. So again, don't miss those opportunities, please. We've got lots of resources here. Go ahead and please stand up and take a minute, and then we'll take a few questions if you have them.